given a lot of latitude to explore that area, free from the constraints of a production that was, in process at the time. Basically, I kind of go where they point me. We've also done a couple of spin-off series where we actually create, or somebody created all the characters, and we get to do all new characters in situations that aren't tied directly to the shows. So there's Star Trek Vanguard and Titan and New Frontier, which I got to write a short story for. But that's mostly Peter David's baby, and he handled all the novels written on that with that set of characters. Basically what happens is an editor will tell me I need a next generation novel for 2019. What do you got? Or if it's the ongoing storyline, then we figure out what the next things are to happen in that ongoing storyline. We work with the editor and the other writers who contributed to that and figure out what the next steps are if we're trying to build a cohesive ongoing storyline. It's been quite an interesting experience working in this realm.
I noticed that some of the books seem to focus on Gary Seven.
Oh, yeah.
And are there aspects of, there are elements of TOS stories that come in, we've watched them on the show, we've watched them on TV. Do they bug you that they don't continue? Do they bug you so much so that you have to think, what happened next? Or what happened before?
There are definitely reasons in all of the different series that I have asked, well, what happens after that? What's the next? What happens to those characters that we never see again? What happens to that alien race that we never saw again? Or that piece of technology or whatever. And Gary Seven is one of those characters where I can honestly say that may not be the best Star Trek episode, the one that introduced him. It's not among the best. And maybe not a lot of fan favorites, but I have a particular soft spot for it. And beyond the episode itself, I was always intrigued by the premise of this agent from, on Earth working on behalf of an alien benefactor to help us get through a very volatile period in our history. I always thought that was interesting. I know there's a lot of comparisons to Doctor Who, or the Doctor, particularly the generations when he was an exile on Earth, like John Pertwee and Tom Baker's incarnations of the Doctor. I find a lot of similarities between that version of the Doctor and Gary Seven. So much so that I really wanted to write a crossover with those characters once for the comic books, but I never got a chance. But as far as the premise, I've always been fascinated by it. And when Greg Cox got to do a couple of novels several years ago focusing on Gary Seven, those were favorites of mine, and I kept them in mind when I finally got around to writing a book that was taking that premise and going in a different direction with it. As a fan, every once in a while they give you a chance to do a pet project or just kind of scratch a fan itch. And those books are definitely in that category where I got to scratch a little bit of a fanboy itch.
Other than an editor coming and saying, give us a Discovery novel or novelette, do you have your own idea for an arc of a story that might take up, say, 3 volumes or whatever? I
generally try not to do that unless specifically asked. Normally when I'm asked to do a book, it's a one book. It's a single story. However, when it comes to the stuff set in the 24th century with Next Generation and Voyager and Deep Space Nine, there's always that the character arcs are continuing from book to book. So even if it's a standalone A plot, we try to find ways to further the B plots with the characters that we've been building all this time. So even the Next Generation books are not totally standalone. They usually have fingers in something else that's going on. The trick is to write each book so that it can stand alone for the reader who grabs it at random, or that's just the one they find that tickles their fancy. So it's definitely a balancing act. The original series novels tend to be much more self-contained and episodic, so they're very much like episodes of the show. But even then, we try to write them with a modern sensibility where, things that happen in one book can be referenced in another book, and maybe we can have some fun with it. When it comes to the Gary Seven stuff, I wrote the first book as a standalone. I had not planned to write a follow-up to it. However, the sales were strong enough and the reactions were strong enough, the reviews, that my editor asked me it's not that, I don't know if she asked me, it's just she didn't say no when I came to the idea. I think I've got a follow-up for that book. And she said, okay, yeah, sure. That one did really well sales-wise. Go ahead and pitch it and let's see where we go from there. So I wrote the idea up and it became the second book. And then when I wrote the second book, I knew I wanted to do a third one. So I set things up in motion to be able to feed into a third one if sales allowed me to do that. So I didn't set out to write a trilogy, but I ended up doing it. So that's the only one time I've ever done that. As far as trilogies and multi-book series, I have in the past been pulled into several of those where there are multiple writers working on the books. So each of us has a book in that sequence. So we all work together to develop the ideas for the larger story that drives all the books, but then also the storylines that help each individual book in the series. That's as close as I got to coming up with trilogies or multi-part series.
Okay. I mean, one of the challenges of Star Trek with, having so many contributors is maintaining canon, I guess, is one thing, and also maintaining continuity. You don't want something happening in 2365 that should have happened in 2278 or something.
And we all take effort. We all take great pains to do that. Keep it all straight. I mean, obviously, we are required to maintain consistency with what you see on the screen, but what you see on the screen can change, and then we just shift gears to adjust. But as far as continuity, yes, Margaret Clark, our editor at Simon and Schuster, is very good in that regard. She knows where all the bodies are buried as far as the different books, and so if we have a storyline that touches on something that happened in another book, she makes sure that all the rough edges are smoothed over and all the gaps are filled in, and that we're aware of something that we may not have read in a book or forgot about. And she's very good about keeping us on the tracks for that kind of thing.
Okay. Does she give you a heads up what I'm going to call them your colleagues in
co-conspirators?
Co-conspirators. On this side of the water, we've got James Swallow and Una McCormick. They work with you?
And Jim Swallow. Yeah, we all worked. We all talk. Yeah. We all touch base with each other informally. We're not. It's not so much a requirement. It's just, I think it's a natural outgrowth of the fact that we've all been doing it for so long, and a lot of the same people have been doing it for so long. It's just sort of second nature to check in with your fellow writers and say, "Hey, I'm going to do a story that does X, Y, Z. I know you were working on a story in this other series, but are we going to collide, or are we compatible? Can we find a way to dovetail with each other?" There's a lot of that. Mostly just it's usually the authors ourselves. We take that on to do ourselves just because we want it to be right for the reader. We don't want the reader to be reading a book and go, "Well, wait a minute, Dayton just did this and Craig did this in another book and they don't work together." Now that's no fun if you're a reader. So we do take a lot of effort or make a lot of effort to do that sort of thing. And then again, Margaret's there with the whip and the chair to make sure we behave.
So you don't get the other guys going, "Damn it, that was my..."
Well, no, yeah, we don't. In fact, when I started fleshing out my first Gary Seven book, I went to Greg Cox, who had written those other books, and I said, "Hey, I've got this idea. I want to kind of I want to have some fun with the Gary Seven character and the Roberta Lincoln character, and I'm going to maintain consistency with the books you wrote. Now, do you have an idea for a book that I don't know about yet that you're thinking about writing?" And he told me at the time that he had not, so I had free reign. But obviously I checked in with him. And I did it again with the other two books. I said, "Hey, I'm going to do this again. Are you still okay with me doing it?" And it's not so much obligation. It's just more professional courtesy and the fact that we're all fans too.
Yeah, we are.
So we want it to be right.
Yeah. I envy the position you're in, and everybody's got a story in the head, and they'd all like to see it in print somewhere, and everybody going, crazy with it.
Oh, I'm very well aware of that. I'm very fortunate. It's been a lot of fun with this. I hesitate to even call it a job, but it is obviously work. There's a lot of work involved in making this stuff right, but I wouldn't trade it away willingly. That's for sure. It's been a lot
absolutely
of fun.
not. And it's a great niche market. Do you think that some of your ideas would bleed over into actual storylines that we might see on the screen, or would they be kept separate, do you think?
I don't think that'll happen. The writers of the show and the showrunners, they have their ideas and vision for what they want the shows to be. So if they want to borrow something that I put in a book, I'd be very flattered, but I don't expect it to happen. If it does happen, you'll know because you'll hear me scream from here without the benefit of the internet.
I think so.
But I mean, and they take a couple of minor things, like a character's name or a ship name or some historical reference that we footnoted somewhere in one of the books. But I don't think that you'll see a novel be the basis of an episode or the basis of a season or anything like that. I don't think they're looking to the novels for ideas. I think they've got plenty of their own. And that's what they get paid to do, and they get paid a lot of money to do it. So I'm content to let them do their thing.
I was thinking about you today as I was driving, and I was thinking, military, Star Trek, what could Dayton do that would be something different? And then I probably come up with something that somebody else has come up somewhere else. But I thought stories based on a ship called the USS Trapper John. and the reg of the ship registration is NCC 40777.
Right.
You're ahead of me there.
Actually, the closest thing that I can say, and this is, it's funny you mentioned that. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there was a series of novellas that Pocket did for ebook platforms called Starfleet Corps of Engineers. We're talking almost 20 years ago they started this, because the first ones came out in late 2000. So they were like a decade ahead of their time in terms of popularity. Nobody anticipated the ebook boom. But the cast of characters for that series there were very much a lot of inspiration taken from MASH. The captain of the ship in particular, there's more than a little inspiration from Sherman Potter in there. And Harry Morgan's portrayal of Sherman Potter in particular. And then the crew dynamic between a couple of characters is very reminiscent of Hawkeye and Trapper, or Hawkeye and BJ, if that's your preference. And there's a very stuffy Tellarite engineer that we modeled after Major Winchester and things like that. So yeah, MASH was a very big influence on that particular series on purpose, because there were a number of us that were fans of that show.
Well, I just suddenly got it, where Sulu learned how to fly a Huey, and in some time travel
travel thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a tie in there somewhere.
There you go.
Oh wow. Anyway, I didn't mean to go off topic like that.
It's okay.
My crazy things. You're currently in the middle of a project right now?
I'm kind of in the middle of a project. I'm working with Modifius, the role-playing game company, the game company. They have a Star Trek role-playing game. So I'm working on some material for one of their source books that they're going to publish later this year. I'm also awaiting the edits for the novel I finished writing late last year. That'll be out later this summer. It's an original series novel for Simon & Schuster. I'm waiting for the copy edits to come back not the copy edits. I'm waiting for the pages to come back from the typesetting, so I can go through them and make sure that it's all behaving or doing what I want it to do. So I should be getting that in the next month or so, and then the book will be out in June. I'm basically in between big projects. I'm waiting for things to be published. I mean, I've got a couple that are coming out in March, and I've got the novel coming out in June. I haven't launched into another novel project just yet. I'm waiting to see what happens with Simon & Schuster's roster of stories and authors for the coming year. And then I've go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, it must be frustrating for you when you finally come to the last page and you put the end, and that's it, and you file it off to whoever, and you sit back and looking at your watch. They must have read it by now. Come on.
Right. No, I'm usually things are set up in such a way that I've delivered one project and there's something else waiting. I'm at the tail end of that something else waiting list of things to do. Once I finish this material for Modifius, if I haven't signed a novel contract by then, I'll be surprised. But I'm also working as a consultant for CBS right now, so I'm doing a lot of stuff for them, and that's almost the equivalent of a full-time job by itself. Doing a lot of review and weighing in on various projects that are underway from Simon & Schuster and IDW Comics and other licensees who are writing Star Trek stories that are connected to the new shows, so Discovery and Picard and some other things that you may have heard about. And then at an as-needed basis, I get pulled in to consult or review on other projects like IDW's line of Star Trek comics. So I read a lot of comic scripts. I look at the comic art. I read all the outlines for novels and the manuscripts. In fact, I'm working my way through a Discovery novel manuscript right now, so I can weigh in on it for notes back to the editor and the folks on the show, Kirsten Beyer. So once we're done talking here, I'll go back to that and finish up that because they're waiting on me. So that's a lot of my day, actually. It's like having a full-time job doing Star Trek, and then if I'm writing, then I got to go do Star Trek writing after that. So it's every day is Star Trek in some form.
Being involved in the Star Trek world is its own life. It has its own pattern. I don't know that it takes over your life, but you certainly focus down a particular avenue, don't you?
I don't know that it's taken over my life, but it's a big part of it. It's a very large part of my waking hours for sure. Like I said, in addition to the things I'm doing that are directly tied to the show, I get pulled in to look at a variety of different pitches and proposals for a number of different things that are being considered, not just for books and games or comics, but other ways of extending the brand, the Star Trek brand. in the experience for fans. So like last year when they had